Well, ladies and gentlemen, you are looking at another Shocco resident, and he has the distinction of being able to slip into Shocco and build a house a quarter of a mile back in the woods, and I didn't know he was there for 4 years. Let me introduce you to Jimmy M. Finger, who is kind of a special type of person. You're gonna be delighted to meet him. Good morning, James.
Good morning, Jim.
Now, you, what we're going to do is try to get back with a little background on you, like where you're from and what you've done. But I want everybody to understand you are looking at a bona fide conservationist. Okay, so we're going to have a conversation with a conservationist. Now, try to say that in a hurry. Where you from, Jimmy, originally?
Originally, I was born in New Orleans, lived there until I was 11 years old, and moved to North Louisiana and lived in a small town called Gilbert. It was on the Mason Ridge there in big farming country. Uh, but that's where I went to high school, and when I finished, I went to Louisiana Polytechnic Institute at the time. It's now called Louisiana Tech University, and was going to major in mathematics. And after 1 year, I just said to myself, I can't do this for the rest of my life, sitting at a desk and crunching numbers. And I think the good Lord had something to play with this, because there was a guy I met that said, well, hey, if you like to hunt and fish, you ought to go into this wildlife program. I had no idea they had a wildlife program. So I switched majors and got my bachelor's degree at Louisiana Tech in
What did you major in?
wildlife management.
Wildlife management. Okay.
And went ahead and submitted an application for getting a master's degree at LSU. The reason I didn't stay at Louisiana Tech is that they didn't offer a master's program, so I had to change schools and went to Baton Rouge and did my thesis in research work for my master's there. And once I finished, I applied for a job with the Louisiana Department of Wildlife and Fisheries, and lucky enough, I was hired. I worked there 31 years and handled managed state wildlife management area that was 60,000 acres, and then managed Catahoula Lake, which is a 30,000 acre waterfowl impoundment, and just had a wonderful life. It was a job you just dream of. And most people pay a lot of money to do what I did for nothing.
Yeah. Well, 31 years. Well,
Yeah.
there's a couple of things having to do with Louisiana that I've been involved with. And um, well, first of all, let me tell you this, folks. He came over to my house here not too long ago, and we watched the Ole Miss LSU game together. Um, yeah, he's smiling, you notice. And he was gentleman enough not to rub it in after LSU tore the Rebels apart. But word was out there a long time ago when they were trying to determine who owned Chandelier Island. Somebody from the Mississippi legislature was dumb enough to allow the Louisiana folks to say, well, let's just put a barrel in the water at the Mississippi, mouth of the Mississippi, and follow that, and we'll make that the border. And the doggone thing went east and swung around all those chandeliers directly south of Gulfport, Mississippi. I had to buy an out-of-state license to saltwater fish to go fish on a chandelier, which I did for 20 years. But anyway, that's you were part of that. You ever go out to Louisiana to Chandelier to check licenses out there?
No, I didn't. I worked as a wildlife biologist. We were all commissioned law enforcement officers, but that was law enforcement was not my primary job. My primary job was management and assisting landowners with management on private properties, where we would had a program called the DMAP program, Deer Management Assistance Program, where we would work with landowners to help them manage their deer herds. We'd go do range surveys and then make recommendations and follow up by aging all the jawbones and recommending modifications if necessary on the deer harvest. But it was a wonderful job. You know, it's you think you worked 31 years in Louisiana, but actually one of the first tasks I had to do when I went to work was to go to Minnesota and trap black bear and bring them back to Louisiana and release them. And then once I became a waterfowl biologist, I would go to Canada and ban ducks. And I remember one trip that I was up there and we would catch birds that had been banded already and would just record the number and release them. And I had done a lot of banding of waterfowl in Louisiana. And I got a letter after I got back home that said, "Hey, you had your hands on this one twice." And it was a pintail that I had banded on Catahoula Lake and retrapped in Saskatchewan.
Wow.
So it was real unique. In the last trip I took up that way, we were neck collaring and banding small Canada geese in the Arctic. And it was so neat that polar bears were all around us. And as we would go, we had 6 people in the Bell Jet Ranger we were working out of. Wouldn't carry that many folks at the same time. So when we'd go band some geese, they'd leave 2 of us there and just shotgun, and the helicopter would fly off, and you couldn't hear it and you couldn't see it, and every big white boulder around Hudson Bay started wiggling and moving. But made it safe back home, no problems whatsoever, but did get a chance to help weigh and tag polar bear while we were up there, because it was a research team that was doing that as well. So
you were involved in tagging and weighing a polar bear?
Yep.
Well, how many folks in Mississippi reckon have that opportunity? By the way, folks, we'll take a little quick break here. Let me show you some things. Take a look at this man's. That's 5 different types of squirrel tails, by the way. And what about that deer? And what about that bass? And I'm going to swing around. I don't know whether you're going to be able to see these or not, but his room is, somebody like me had maybe a 5 or 6 or 8 pound bass or something on the wall and come in here and look at this. I am humbled, I can tell you that. You're a real,
that's a
real
10,
hunter and a fisherman.
10, a 10-3, and an 11 pounder, the 3 bass that I got.
Say that again.
A 10 pound 3 ounce, and an 11 pound bass.
Where did you catch those?
In a lake just west of Canton.
West of Canton?
Mm-hmm.
Here?
Here. In Louisiana, I never caught a 7 pound bass. There were so many commercial fishing activities on lots of lakes and stuff that they weren't intentionally doing it, but the bigger bass were getting caught in their commercial fishing nets. And that's what I blamed it on anyhow. But came over here, and every time we went to that lake, we'd catch at least 1 7 pounder or better. And
well, I'm not going to ask you exactly where it is, because we'd have folks covering the place up from here. But you and I'm going to have to talk to you privately after this is over with.
Be glad to pass the word on.
What'd you catch them on?
On crankbaits mostly.
Huh.
The little shad crankbaits that would run about 5 or 6 foot underwater, and once you hook one of them, it's a task to get them in the boat.
It's a rodeo. Huh.
Yes.
Well,
but as far as work, when I retired from the State Wildlife Department, I was going to come to Mississippi and set up the alligator harvest program for Mississippi. Dr. Polis, who was director at that time, told me, he said, "Oh, job's yours, just fill out your application." And the phone rang, and it was Ducks Unlimited. They have a regional office here in Jackson. And they offered me a job, and I couldn't pass it up. I said, I got to do that. And so I worked for them for 13 years.
With Ducks Unlimited?
Yes.
Uh,
And
well, you need Billy Joe Cross then, with that.
Yes, in fact, Billy Joe was acting director when I went to work there.
Yeah, he was the head of the Game and Fish Commission here in Mississippi for years.
Yes.
Good friend of mine, by the way.
Well, and it was a good friend of mine, but Lord have it, we've lost him. He's gone to be with God.
Yeah, he put out a cookbook. He was just a gourmet chef, you know.
Yes, he was. And of course, when I was a kid in New Orleans, my grandmother and great grandmother lived with us, and my grandmother would teach. She taught me how to make a good Cajun roux before I could walk real good, and of course, along when chopping up all your vegetables and seasonings and what have you. And then Tony Sashery came along and put it all in one container, so it makes it a lot easier to season your food now.
Now, you folks out there who don't know, now almost everybody in Mississippi and Louisiana, I guess, know what a roux is. But now I can remember one time when I was a kid, we lived in Houma, Louisiana. And my mother was an outstanding cook, but she was kind of driven crazy because she was trying to learn how to do that Cajun cooking down around Houma. And the first thing she always ran into was they said, first make a roux. She said, what in thunder is a roux? She had no idea, but she finally found out. So, and there's an art to that, isn't it?
Yes, it is. If you scorch it, you'd have to start all over again. And but it takes a while. In fact, Vicky always says I got the patience of Job because Vicky's my wife. Because when I make a roux, sometimes it takes 30 to 45 minutes to get it done. And but it's constantly stirring your flour and grease and browning it until you get it just like you want.
Well, I'll say this: Vicky, what I understand, makes a gumbo that make a New Orleans chef jealous.
Yeah. I tell you what, I told her she had a little Cajun in her somewhere. She grew up in Birmingham, Alabama. I said, but you got a little Cajun in you somewhere because you couldn't make a gumbo that good.
Well, so you were Ducks Unlimited for what, 13
years?
Doing what now, primarily?
I started out handling their reforestation for the Wetland Reserve Program. And that's a federal government program that converts marginal farmland back to trees and reestablish the wetlands on them. And while working there, we reforested over 300,000 acres here in the southeast. And then later on, I was director of land protection and handled the conservation easement program for the southern region of Ducks Unlimited, which is from like Texas up to Missouri to the East Coast and the Carolinas. So that part of the United States is the part that we covered. And that's where we would put conservation easements on land that would make it stay as it is. In other words, you could harvest the timber, but you couldn't clear cut it. You could farm it, but only on the farmland that was there at the time that the easement was placed on it. And then if you sold it, you had to sell it as one tract. It couldn't be subdivided and sold in smaller portions. Mm-hmm. So it maintained the wildlife habitat on private lands through that easement program. And the landowners, when you put these restrictions on the land, the value of the land went down. And so you were paid that in cash to compensate for the losses that you put onto your property. But we did over 300,000 acres of land protection like that.
Where was most of that land?
Most of it was Louisiana, Mississippi, Arkansas.
I remember Louisiana and Mississippi had some type of agreement for a deer hunting was concerned, having to do with the river. What was it? Can you explain what that was?
Don't know what you...
Well, there was something having to do with the license, out-of-state licenses that we were able to somehow come into some type of an agreement. And it seemed like Mississippi and Louisiana were always fussing at each other about it.
Well, it's so funny. There's Mississippi land on the west side of the river, and there's Louisiana lands on the east side of the river. So the river doesn't necessarily line up as a border between the two states. There's some old oxbows where the river had changed course, and Mississippi land then was on the wrong side of the river.
Yeah, that's what it was.
And but you can hunt over there on Mississippi lands with your Mississippi license, and with no problems at all.
Yeah, that's what it was. I guess there's some question about who had what where. Anyway, I remember that used to be. So I was raised in Natchez, so on the river, so there was a whole lot of conversation about that.
Very much so, yes. And after I left Ducks Unlimited, it was a result of the economy going south, and the economy got bad in 2008, and they ended up having to reduce the staff. And because I had a retirement and Social Security, and they had young families whose person worked for Ducks Unlimited, they terminated my position and kept those, which I bless them for it, because they needed it a whole lot worse than I did. And once I left there, then I set up my own consulting firm and worked on pipelines, mainly the CO2 lines that we use for fracking, and would handle the environmental work there, so that to minimize the impact of the pipelines as they went through forested and wetland areas.
You still doing any of that?
I do a little bit of it, mostly in helping manage private lands, deer management on private lands.
Mm-hmm.
But basically, I'm retired now, and I pretty much stay here with my bride, and we enjoy the good life of Shocco.
Shocco, Mississippi.
Yes, sir.
Well, just another dyed in the wool Shocco resident. That's all. Yeah. We don't have many people that are just outstanding, except those that tag polar bears and that kind of thing. Well, I understand today you all are starting off on a trip to Greece.
Yeah, we're gonna land in Italy first, and tour around Rome, going to Israel, and have a bunch of tours in Israel. We're big Christians, and we want to walk where Jesus walked and visit the sites that we read about in the Bible all the time. And then we're going to Syria, and then to Greece. It's a 16-day trip with Viking cruises. Yeah. And we've been looking forward to it for almost a year since we purchased it, and looking for the wonderful trip.
Well, we're gonna miss y'all, but safe trip. Have a safe trip, and we'll see you when you get back. Maybe we can arrange a fishing trip where you can kind of maybe show me where the possibility of a 10 or 11 pounder is waiting on me.
Well, you actually have one between me and you.
Well, that's right. And he lives. We're pretty close neighbors at Shocco. He's only about a half a mile away from me. So. And
between us is a place that I think the biggest one that I know of they caught out there was 15 pounds. So.
Where?
Many Streets.
Oh man! Well, I dug that pond. I dug that lake years and years ago before Benny bought it. So I did 15 pounds.
Yeah.
God, well, I must have planted him when he was a little. Y'all have a safe trip, man. I appreciate this, and we'll see you when you get back.
Thank you, Jim.
Okay.